when you're not suffering, there's no need to seek, is there? Yeah, you're happy. You're bumbling along, doing whatever you're doing. You know, when you suffer, that's when you start to turn up to whatever it is, you know, because no one's going to come along to this kind of meeting unless they're suffering, right? Well, there might be some exceptions. But, you know, you're not going to turn towards spirituality, which is essentially a remedy for suffering, right? You're not going to look for a remedy to suffering unless you're suffering. So even though suffering feels horrible, or, well, it feels negative, let's say. It might feel uncomfortable if it's not very much suffering. Or it might feel, you know, atrocious, terrible if it's very bad suffering. But either way, it feels negative. You know, when you have this, when you suffer, you don't want to suffer because it doesn't feel good. But we'll come to see that suffering is a great blessing. And especially with liberation, you see that it's suffering that pushes you towards liberation. It's suffering that keeps you seeking, seeking, seeking. And it's that seeking, seeking, seeking that makes you turn up to sort of meetings like this, or do whatever you're doing on your spiritual quest. Maybe you're devouring spiritual texts and books. Maybe you're going online and watching loads of YouTube videos. Maybe you're meditating for several hours, or doing whatever you're doing. It's the suffering that propels you to do these things. And then through doing these things, eventually you come across a teaching or a teacher that is right for you. Okay. And I hope that, well, I say I hope as you're here that this teaching or this teacher, me, is right for you right now. But I don't, it might not be the one that's right for you. I don't claim to be, right for everybody. And then through that teacher teaching, and it doesn't have to be a formal teacher or teaching. Life teaches in many ways, right? You discover something, or something falls away, and eventually this brings us to liberation. That's just the way it works. And until then, we alternate between pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, happiness, suffering, happiness, suffering, happiness, suffering. And that's called, when you alternate between happiness, suffering, happiness, suffering, happiness, suffering, that whole process is called suffering. Initially, when you're younger, perhaps, you're happy that you're happy sometimes, and then you're sad at other times, but you know you're going to be happy again maybe, and so it's fine. However, as you get older, it starts to wear a bit thin, because even when you're happy, you know that suffering is just around the corner, or something keeps on happening in life. You think, okay, if I just do A, B, and C, I'm going to be happy. And then you do A, B, and C finally. You work really hard and you get A, B, and C that you've been looking for. And you think you're happy, and then D happens. And you think, oh, fuck. I didn't even think D could happen. And then, so life keeps on. Life will keep on making you suffer. Keep on making you suffer until you turn inwards and abide as the self and end suffering. So it's true that is the seeking that creates the suffering, but there's a cause for the seeking. And the cause for the seeking we call ignorance. And unless that's removed, Tisha, you can't just stop seeking otherwise. You've got to remove the cause. So if the ignorance is the belief I am the body mind. I'm in limit. Earlier in the call I said ignorance is the belief I am limited. That limiting concept, the me concept, the I concept, the I thought. Ramana calls it the I thought. You can call it the me concept. The me concept, the idea of being a separate me, is the root ignorance. And if that's in place, then you will have to seek and you will have to suffer. The very existence of that root concept, I'm a body mind, will cause you to suffer. So if you take yourself to be that body-mind entity, then you can't stop seeking, because that is the ignorance. Because as soon as you take yourself to be limited, you're in danger of illness, death, and not only your own illness and death, but the illness, death, and suffering of those around you as well, your loved ones, your society. You see, there's endless suffering. And you'll never figure it out until you abide as the self. Or you can go the other way and try and block yourself and ignore and run away from it, which is, maybe you can do it in many ways, from becoming a workaholic to getting into drugs, to getting addicted to Netflix or something, to try and numb the brain to avoid the pain of daily life. But it doesn't work, and it's often destructive to a greater or lesser extent, depending on your escape of choice. Some escapes are more dangerous than others, of course. So the answer is the Vedanta teachings, and there are other teachings as well, but I like the Vedanta teachings. You'll see the same answers in many different teachings. It just so happens I like the Vedanta ones, and they're very good. So the thing is that how to stop seeking, if seeking is causing the suffering, how to stop taking yourself to be the body-mind? Unless you're told, it's unlike, well, you could find it out yourself, but unless you stumble upon a method, either by accident or by coming to a meeting like this or something similar, how are you going to remove the egotism?